Welcome to the Heartbreak Chronicles, where every story is a raw reflection of life. Hit that subscribe button to stay tuned, give us a like to show your support, and share this episode with your friends. Don't forget to leave a comment and let us know what you think. Now, let's dive into today's story. Fall in New York is always a heartwarming experience. The streets are covered with golden leaves, and the cool air is filled with a light, woody aroma. In the midst of this beautiful season, a life-changing event occurred for John Wilson. John is the editor-in-chief of a local newspaper. He is 50 years old, has a successful career, and a beautiful family. At least that's what he thought before that night. That night, he and his wife, Emily, attended a big charity dinner. Emily wore a black backless gown that complemented her elegant figure. John looked at his wife's back with pride. The dinner went well. John and Emily socialize separately as he chats with some old friends about recent news hits. Just as he was about to go to Emily, an unfamiliar voice rang in his ear. "Don't go there." John turned and saw a lady in a dark blue dress. She has long dark hair, and her eyes are sad and wary. "What?" John asked, a little confused. "Your wife is being seduced by that man." The woman pointed to the other end of the hall. "And he is a dangerous man." John followed her gaze, only to see Emily joking with a man in a suit. The man was tall, handsome, and elegant. John recognized him as Trevor Reed, the famous New York real estate mogul. "How do you know?" John asked, frowning, but already beginning to feel uneasy. The woman sighed and began to tell her story. 7 years ago, I attended such a dinner. At that time, my husband and I were very close, and we had 3 lovely children. But that night, Trevor made a passionate advance on me. He said so many sweet things. He made me dizzy. In the end, I went with him." John looked at her in surprise. "And?" "That was a crazy weekend. By the time I came to my senses, it was too late. My husband couldn't forgive me, and we got divorced. The kids don't want to see me again either. My life is completely ruined." There was pain in the woman's voice. "Trevor just used me as prey, got tired of playing with me, and abandoned me." John felt a pang of heartache for what had happened to this strange woman and for what he might be facing. He looked at Emily again and realized that Trevor was caressing her arm and whispering something in her ear. Emily's face was flushed, and there was a gleam of excitement in her eyes. "I have to stop this," John said, going over. The woman took his arm. "Don't be impulsive. You'll only make it worse by going over there now. Believe me, I've been there." John hesitated. He watched Emily and Trevor walk toward the terrace, his heart filled with powerlessness and anger. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked, desperation in his voice. "Watch, wait, then act." The woman said, "Trevor won't get it right away. He'll slowly seduce Emily until she falls completely. You still have time." John took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. He and the woman continued to talk, learning more about Trevor. It turns out that this glamorous tycoon is secretly a playboy who specializes in seducing married women. He has a sophisticated way of making women swoon over him. Time passes by. John's anger grew as he watched Emily and Trevor talk intimately on the patio. Finally, Emily came back down the hall. Her face was flushed, her eyes wandered, and she looked like she was drunk. "John, honey," Emily came over, a hint of unnaturalness in her tone. "I'm a little sick. Trevor said he could take me home. You don't have to worry about it. Just enjoy the dinner." John held back his anger and said calmly, "Okay, you be safe." Emily kisses him on the cheek, then follows Trevor away. John stood still, watching his wife's back disappear in the doorway, his heart cold. "She's gone, isn't she?" the woman asked softly. John nodded, a flash of determination in his eyes. "Yes, she's gone. But this is not the end. It's the beginning." "What are you going to do?" the woman asked. John took a deep breath and a cold light flashed in his eyes. "I'm going to make them pay. Emily, Trevor, everyone involved in this is going to regret this." The woman looked at John's determined expression and said softly, "If you need help, you can contact me. My name is Sarah." John gave her a grateful look, then took out his cell phone and dialed a number. "Steve, it's me. I need your help. Come to my house now." "Yes, it's urgent." After hanging up, John said to Sarah, "Thanks for telling me that tonight. I've got to go, there's a lot to take care of." Sarah nodded. "Good luck, John. Remember, don't let hatred blind you." John didn't answer, just turned and left the dinner party. His mind had already begun to conceptualize a plan for revenge. This night marked a turning point in John Wilson's life. From then on, he would embark on a path filled with pain, anger, but ultimately leading to redemption. At night, John drives home to prepare for the coming storm. He knew that starting tonight, his life would change forever. But he was determined to get justice, no matter what the cost. John Wilson's car pulled up in front of the house, but he didn't get out right away. He sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the steering wheel, and took several deep breaths, trying to calm the anger and pain inside him. He knew that every next step was crucial and could not be swayed by emotions. John stepped out of his car just as Steve Dawson's car pulled up to the curb. Steve is a longtime friend of John's and an experienced attorney. Seeing John's gloomy face, Steve immediately realized the gravity of the situation. "What happened, John?" asked Steve with concern as he walked briskly over. John briefly explains what happened at the dinner and Emily's betrayal. Steve's face turned serious as he listened. "Let's talk inside," Steve said. "It looks like we have a lot of work to do." The two entered the house, and John headed straight for the study. He opened the safe and took out all the important documents: bank account information, proof of real estate, insurance documents, etc. Steve took the papers and began to scrutinize them. "I'm going to divorce Emily," John said firmly, "and I'm going to make sure she gets nothing out of this divorce." Steve nodded. "I understand. But we have to be careful and make sure everything is legally compliant. Do you have any specific ideas?" John sneered. "First, I'm going to freeze all joint accounts. And then I'm going to sell the BMW I gave her. That's registered in my name." Steve said thoughtfully, "All of this can be done. But keep an eye on the clock. We have to finish these before Emily gets back." Just then, John's cell phone rang. It was a text message from Emily. "Honey, I'm not coming home tonight. Trevor invited me to a private party. Don't wait up for me." John handed Steve his cell phone to look at. Steve sighed and said, "Well, looks like we have more time. But John, are you sure you want to do this? Maybe there's room for redemption?" John's eyes turned cold. "No, Steve. Emily has made her choice. Now it's my turn to make my choice." Throughout the evening, John and Steve were busy. They drew up divorce papers, prepared a restraining order application, and contacted the bank to freeze joint accounts. John also found a company online that buys used cars and planned to sell Emily's BMW first thing the next morning. Near dawn, Steve tapped John on the shoulder. "You should get some rest. It's going to be tough the rest of the year, and you need to keep your head up." John nodded, but he knew he couldn't sleep. After Steve left, he sat on the couch in the living room and stared at the wedding picture on the wall. It was his happiest moment with Emily, and now it's like an ironic joke. Early in the morning, John contacted a locksmith to replace all the locks on the doors in the house. Then he drove to the newspaper office. Despite being physically and mentally exhausted, he knew he had to keep up the appearance of normal work. In his office, John summons the paper's best investigative reporter, Joe Spain. "Joe, I have an important assignment for you," John said. "I need you to investigate Trevor Reed, dig up all the dark stuff about him, both in business and in his personal life." Joe was a little surprised. "Trevor Reed? The real estate mogul? Boss, this is a big one. Are we sure we want to do this?" John's eyes sharpened. "That's him. I want you to use every means at your disposal to find out all his secrets. But proceed with caution and don't spook." Joe nodded and left the office. John leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He knew that this was just the beginning of the revenge plan. In the afternoon, John received a call from Emily. She said she was on her way home, a hint of unease and guilt in her tone. John replied coldly, "Okay, I'm going back soon too." When John arrived home, Emily's car was already parked in the driveway. He took a deep breath and walked into the house. Emily was waiting for John in the garden, and when she saw him coming, she immediately followed him with tears in her eyes. "John, we need to talk?" John looked at her coldly. "Yes, we do need to talk. But first, your key." Emily looked at him confused. What? Your key doesn't work, John said. I changed the locks. Emily looked at him in shock, suddenly realizing the gravity of the situation. John, what are you talking about? I know what I did was wrong, but we can talk and work this out. John sneered. Settle? Emily, you betrayed me and our marriage. What else is there to fix? Emily began to cry. John, please. I love you. It was just a mistake. We can start over. John shook his head and pulled a stack of papers from his pocket. No, Emily, we don't get a chance to start over. Here are the divorce papers and the restraining order. From now on, you are not allowed to enter this house, approach me, or touch our joint property. Emily sat paralyzed on the couch, unable to believe what she was hearing. You can't do this. This is my home too. John said coldly, no, this isn't your home anymore. I've sold your car, and I'll have your clothes and personal belongings packed and sent to your parents' house. You have 15 minutes to gather the essentials and leave. Emily broke down and fell to her knees in front of John, crying and pleading, John, please, give me a chance. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Don't do this to me. John stepped back, avoiding Emily's touch. Time's up, Emily. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police. A twinge of pain flooded John's heart as he watched his once beloved wife cry out in pain. But he quickly suppressed the feeling. He thought of Emily and Trevor's intimate behavior at the dinner party, of the way she had left with Trevor without hesitation. These memories made his heart grow cold again. Eventually, Emily left with a small bag. The moment the door closed, John leaned against the wall and let out a long breath. He knew that this was just the beginning. He will face more challenges and pain in the days to come. But he had made up his mind to see this revenge through to the end. John went to the window and watched Emily drive away crying. He picked up his cell phone and dialed Sarah's number. Sarah, it's me, John. I did. Now, I need your help. As night falls, a silence falls over John's home. But beneath the silence, a storm is brewing. John Wilson's quest for revenge is just beginning. Emily walks into the Gravely Publishing building in a trance, her face still bearing the marks of her crying. As senior vice president, she has always presented herself with elegance and confidence. But today, she looks like a lost soul. When Emily walks into her office, Jessica, her administrative assistant, immediately notices the anomaly. Emily, are you okay? Jessica asked with concern. Emily forced a smile. I'm fine, Jess. Just a little tired. Jessica was about to say something, but finally said, Emily, you might need to know. The whole company is talking about you and John. Emily jerked her head up. What? Jessica whispered, yes, about you leaving with Trevor Reed at the charity dinner. Everyone is passing on. Emily felt a wave of vertigo, and she held onto the table before she could stand still. Just then, her boss, Gwendolyn Harrelson, pushed open the door and walked in. Emily, we need to talk. Gwendolyn's tone was serious. This has affected the company's reputation. Emily looked at Gwendolyn desperately. Gwen, please. Give me some time. I'll take care of it. Gwendolyn sighed. Emily, you know I've always considered you a friend. But as the head of the company, I have to consider the interests of the company. The board has asked us to temporarily suspend you. Emily felt the sky spinning. In a matter of days, she lost her husband and now even her job is in jeopardy. Just then, Emily's cell phone rang. It's her best friend and her private bank manager, Stephanie Jameson. Emily picks up the phone, hoping for some comfort. Emily, what happened? Stephanie's voice was filled with worry. I just got a notice that all your accounts are going to be frozen. Emily shuddered. Steph, I need your help. John wants to divorce me, he froze our joint account. There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment. Then Stephanie whispered, Emily, I'm so sorry, but I can't help you. It's a legal process and I have no right to interfere. And she paused. As a friend, I must say, you really did the wrong thing this time. After hanging up the phone, Emily was completely devastated. She curled up on the couch in her office, tears falling like rain. She suddenly realized that not only had she lost her husband, but she could also lose her job, friends, and social status. Meanwhile, John is at home preparing for an upcoming family meeting. He invited their son Michael Jr. and daughter Ashley, hoping to explain the difficult decision to them in person. When the doorbell rang, John took a deep breath and walked to the door. Michael Jr. and Ashley stood in the doorway with confusion and concern on their faces. "Dad, what's going on?" Michael Jr. asked as soon as he walked in the door. "Why isn't Mom answering our calls?" John gestured for the children to sit down. "Boys, I have something to tell you. This may come as a shock and a pain to you, but I hope you understand." Just as John was about to speak, the doorbell rang again. John frowned as he walked to the door to find Emily standing outside with a female at her side. "Emily, I told you you couldn't be here," John said coldly. Emily's attorney, Kathleen O'Hara, stepped forward. "Mr. Wilson, I'm Emily's attorney. We're here for a family meeting." John sneered. "Bringing a lawyer to a family meeting?" "So true, Emily." Despite John's reluctance, he let them in. The atmosphere in the living room was suddenly tense. "Mom!" Ashley ran over and hugged Emily. "What the hell is going on? Why did Dad say you were getting a divorce?" Emily looked to John and then back to the kids with tears in her eyes. "Kids, I made a mistake." John interrupted her. "No, Emily. Don't glorify your behavior. Tell them the truth." Over the next hour, John details Emily's betrayal. He describes the scene at the charity dinner, how Emily left with Trevor Reed, and how she didn't go home all weekend. Michael Jr. and Ashley listen in disbelief. "Mom, is this true?" Michael Jr. asked with a shaky voice. Emily lowered her head, tears slipping down her face. "Yes. I'm so sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me." Ashley stood up angrily. "How could you do this to Daddy? To our family?" Emily's attorney tried to interject. "Please calm down. This kind of thing is complicated, and we need to be rational." "Shut up," John snarled. "This is our family business. We don't need you to tell us what to do." The ensuing discussion became more heated. Michael Jr. and Ashley are frustrated and angry with their mother's behavior, while Emily keeps apologizing and crying. Finally, John stood up and said in a firm voice, "Emily, I've made up my mind. We will be divorced. You have betrayed this family. You don't deserve to be their mother." Emily looked at John in horror. "No, you can't. They are my children too." Michael Jr. and Ashley looked at each other, not knowing what to do. They loved both parents, but at the moment, they sympathized more with the father. John continued, "The kids are adults and they can make their own decisions. But I want you to understand that your mother has done something unforgivable." Emily's attorney stood up. "Mr. Wilson, this threat is unacceptable. We'll settle this in court." John sneered. "Suit yourself. Emily, if you have an ounce of sense, you should accept my offer. Otherwise, I promise I'll show all of New York what kind of man you are." Emily stood up shakily. "John, please. We can settle this privately. Don't get the kids involved." John looked at Emily with disappointment and anger in his eyes. "It's too late, Emily. You should have thought of that. Now, please leave my house." Emily looked at her children tearfully. "Michael, Ashley, Mommy is so sorry. I love you guys." The children didn't respond, just watched in silence as their mother left. The moment the door closed, the entire home fell into a dead silence. John sighed deeply and turned to the kids. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that. But I want you to understand that some mistakes can't be fixed." Michael Jr. and Ashley embraced their father, knowing that from this day forward, their family would be forever different. And Emily, when she walks out of the home that was once filled with laughter, she feels like her life is in tatters. She didn't know if she would ever get the chance to rebuild everything, but she knew that it would be an extremely difficult road. Time flies, and 3 years have passed. John Wilson's life is outwardly peaceful again, but the anger inside is never quenched. His plan for revenge runs silently like a sophisticated machine. During those 3 years, John used his influence as editor-in-chief to secretly gather a great deal of dark information about Trevor Reed. His right-hand man, Joe Spain, managed to unearth Trevor's many transgressions in real estate transactions, including bribing officials, tax evasion, and money laundering. John did not immediately make this information public. Instead, he chose a more subtle and brutal way to destroy Trevor. He anonymously tipped off Trevor's competitors and law enforcement agencies, causing several of Trevor's big deals to fall through one after the other, and his company's stock price to start plummeting. Meanwhile, John and Sarah's relationship has subtly changed over the 3 years. From their initial sympathy for each other's illnesses to their support for each other, the two gradually develop a special emotional connection. Though neither of them wanted to admit it, everyone around them could see that they had feelings for each other that went beyond friendship. Just as John's plan for revenge is getting underway, he receives a call from his son, Michael Jr. "Dad, I'm getting married," Michael Jr. said with joy in his voice, "and I want you to come to the wedding." John felt a surge of relief. "Of course, son. I'm glad to hear that." However, Michael Jr.'s next words made John cringe. "Dad, I invited Mom too. I want you to make peace at my wedding." John was silent for a moment and finally said, "I'll be there, son, but don't expect too much." On the day of the wedding, it was an exceptionally sunny day in New York. John, dressed in a smart suit, stood in the doorway of the church and watched the guests arrive. Suddenly, he saw Emily. Having not seen her for 3 years, Emily has obviously aged a lot. Her blonde hair was laced with many gray strands, and the wrinkles at the corners of her eyes were much deeper. When she saw John, a flicker of panic and guilt flashed across her face. The wedding went well. Michael Jr. and his bride look happily married. John kept a decent smile on his face the whole time, but he could feel Emily's eyes on him from time to time. At the reception after the wedding, Emily worked up the courage to walk up to John. "John," she whispered, "can we talk?" John gave her a cold look. "We have nothing to talk about, Emily." A flash of pain flashed in Emily's eyes. "Please, John. It's been 3 years. I know I made an unforgivable mistake, but I really want to make amends. For the sake of the children, we just can't." John interrupted. "For the kids." "Emily, did you ever think about the kids in the first place? When you betrayed our family?" Emily lowered her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I regret it every day, John. I lost everything. You, the kids, my job, my friends. I realize now how precious what I once had was." John looked at Emily, a flicker of mixed emotions flooding his mind. But soon, he remembered the betrayal of that night, and all sympathy evaporated. "It's too late, Emily," John said coldly. "Enjoy the rest of your life." After saying that, he turned and left, leaving Emily standing alone with tears streaming down her face. 2 years have passed. The time has finally come for John's revenge plan to close the net. Under his careful maneuvering, Trevor Reed's empire begins to crumble. The New York Herald ran investigative stories on Trevor for weeks, exposing all of his criminal behavior. Trevor was eventually arrested, his company went bankrupt, and all of his property was seized. John stood in front of his office window and watched the TV news as Trevor was escorted by the police, a sneer appearing at the corner of his mouth. Just when John thinks the dust has settled, he gets a call from his daughter Ashley. "Dad," Ashley's voice sounded anxious. "It's about Mom. She's hospitalized." John felt a palpitation. "What's going on?" Ashley choked back a sob. "The doctor said she was suffering from major depression. She tried to kill herself." John gripped the phone, momentarily at a loss for how to react. Even though he still held a grudge against Emily, he felt a pang of heartache at the news. "I know," John said at last. "I'll go see her." When John walks into the hospital room, he sees a desiccated Emily. She lay in the hospital bed, her eyes staring lifelessly at the ceiling. There was a flash of surprise in her eyes when she saw John come in, then numbness returned. "John," Emily said weakly, "you're here." John sat down at the hospital bedside and looked at his once beautiful and attractive wife, now emaciated with mixed feelings. "Why?" John asked. Emily smiled bitterly. "Why did you kill yourself?" "Because I finally realized that it wasn't just you and the kids I lost. I lost myself." "John, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry." John was silent for a long time and finally said, "Emily, I can't forgive you. But I don't want you to either." Emily turned her head, tears slipping down her face. "John, I know it's probably too late for that, but I still love you. Always loved. John stood up and gave Emily a deep look. Take care, Emily. Then he turned and left the ward. Walking out of the hospital, John felt a wave of exhaustion like no other. He took out his cell phone and dialed Sarah's number. Sarah, John said, I need you. Sarah's soft voice came, I'm here, John. All the time. John closed his eyes and felt the emotions tumbling inside. He knows that neither his hatred for Emily nor his vengeance against Trevor can truly heal the wounds inside him. Maybe it's time to let go of the past and start over. However, fate doesn't seem to be about to let John off the hook. Just as he decides to let it all go, Emily gets out of the hospital and contacts him again, asking to meet. John agreed. They meet at a cafe, and Emily looks better than she did at the hospital. John, Emily spoke up. I know I'm in no position to ask for anything, but I would like to ask for your forgiveness. Not to get back together, but so we can both let go of the past and move on with our lives. John looked at Emily, conflicted inside. Just then, his cell phone rang. It's Ashley. Dad. Ashley's voice was full of excitement. I'm going to be a mom. You're going to be a grandfather. A warmth welled up in John's heart. He looks at Emily and suddenly realizes that life goes on. No matter what has happened in the past, the future remains full of promise. Emily, John said slowly, I can't quite forgive you. But maybe we can try to make peace, for the sake of our children, for the sake of the grandchildren who will be born. There was a twinkle in Emily's eyes as she nodded softly. Thank you, John. It means everything to me. As John left the cafe, he felt as if the weight inside him was lighter. He knew that true healing would take time, but at least he had taken the first step. John took out his cell phone and sent Sarah a message. Dinner tonight? There's something I want to share with you. Sarah quickly replied, Sure, I'll wait. John smiled and walked to his car. The sun was warm and bright on his face. Despite all the turmoil of the past few years, at the moment, John feels as if life is unfolding in a new direction. Autumn in New York is still beautiful, with golden leaves covering the paths of Central Park. John Wilson stands in the cemetery, holding a bouquet of white roses. His eyes landed on Emily's tombstone with mixed feelings. Emily's passing came both suddenly and not so suddenly. After that cafe conversation, Emily seemed to find hope in her life again. She began actively treating her depression and working to repair her relationship with her children. However, fate always likes to play jokes. Just a month before Ashley's baby was born, Emily suffered a heart attack while attending a charity event. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. Doctors said years of depression and anxiety had severely compromised her heart health, which, combined with the excitement and stress of the moment, led to the tragedy. John remembers being in total shock when he received a call from Michael Jr. Dad, Mom. Mom's gone. Michael Jr.'s voice trembled. She was on her way to the hospital. John was feeling a wave of vertigo and had to hold onto the table to stay on his feet. Despite the fact that they were divorced, despite the fact that he had hated her so much, in that moment he felt nothing but endless sadness and regret. On the day of the funeral, the entire New York sky was overcast, as if mourning Emily as well. John stood at the back of the crowd, watching his sons and daughters cry and Emily's friends and family grieve. He wanted to go up and say something, but in the end just stood there quietly, tears slipping silently down his face. Now, standing at Emily's grave, John sighed deeply. Emily, he whispered, I came to see you. He leaned down and carefully placed the white rose in front of the tombstone. I'm sorry, John continued. I should have forgiven you sooner. Maybe if I could let go of the hate, things would be different. A light breeze ruffled John's slightly graying hair. He closed his eyes and thought back to the good times they'd had. The first date, the night they'd proposed, the joy when their children were born. All those memories suddenly became so clear. I forgive you, Emily, John finally said, his voice choking. I hope you find peace over there. I also hope you can forgive me for my stubbornness and paranoia. As John straightened up, he felt as if the weight on his heart was lighter. He knew that this decision was not only for Emily, but for himself. It's time to really let go of the past and start a new life. After leaving the cemetery, John drove to his office. Although retired, he still maintains a small office where he occasionally comes to work. Today, he had an important task to accomplish. John went into his office, turned on his computer, and began writing a special editorial. This article will reveal the whole story, including his revenge on Emily and how that revenge destroyed Trevor Reed. But more importantly, this post will be about the power of forgiveness and redemption. During the writing process, John stopped now and then to wipe the tears from the corners of his eyes. He looks back over the years and realizes that hate has not only hurt others, but also himself. Just as John was concentrating on his writing, there was a soft knock on the office door. He looked up and it was Sarah. "I guess you'll be here," Sarah said gently. "It's the anniversary of Emily's death, isn't it?" John nodded and gestured for Sarah to come in. Sarah walked over to him and looked at the computer screen. "What are you writing?" she asked curiously. "An end and a beginning," John replied. "I think it's time for the truth to come out." Sarah nodded understandingly and gave John's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You did the right thing. This must not be easy for you." John took Sarah's hand and looked at her gratefully. "Thank you for always being there for me, Sarah. Without you, I could be lost in hate forever." Sarah smiled and said, "We support each other, don't we? This is what friends and lovers should do." John stood up and took Sarah into his arms. After so many storms, he finally realized that true happiness was just around the corner. "Sarah," John said softly, "let's go on a vacation when this article is published. Just the two of us." Sarah leaned against John's chest and nodded. "Sounds great. We get to see places we've always wanted to visit but never had the chance to." John smiled, feeling a sense of inner peace and hope. He knew that while the past could not be changed, the future was still bright. With Sarah by his side and a release from the past, he can finally truly move on. The next day, John's editorial was published as a front-page headline in the local newspaper. The article caused a huge stir and many were moved by John's candor and courage. More people are beginning to reflect on the meaning of hate and forgiveness. A week later, John and Sarah set off on their journey around the world. As the plane slowly took off, John looked out the window at New York City and a wave of relief and anticipation washed over him. He knew that a new journey in life awaited him. On the plane, John took out a small notebook and began to write down a new plan for his life. The first of these is, learn to forgive and cherish the people in front of you. Sarah leaned on his shoulder and whispered, "I'm so proud of you, John." John turned his head and placed a soft kiss on Sarah's forehead. "Thank you, Sarah." The plane flew through the clouds toward the horizon. And so begins a new life for John Wilson. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, please feel free to contact me. Take care.